welcome into the Jock Market Strategy Show here as we have IPOs and turning DFS into a stock market. We have Greg Ehrenberg, who is our in-house Jock Market expert here to make sure that you are fully prepared for Thursday night football and really the strategy of it, understanding how to work Jock Market and, of course, just how different it can be, but how fun everything is once the games begin. That's another key element here is the live trading, if you will, of player stock never stops as soon as the games are underway. Greg, my man, I appreciate it. As always, all of us appreciate you being here and dropping some Jock Market knowledge. I know it's a busy day as we head into Thursday night football. So how you feeling first and foremost?
Well, I think we set the bar a little high by calling me an expert. Let's say enthusiast, maybe. But, you know, one thing about Jock Market, it's still new. We're all learning it. And especially for football season, we've only had a couple weeks of it to this point. But yeah, for sure, it's something that learning more about and trying to develop that strategy. But I kind of think that's something that's fun about learning Jock Market as we do some of these shows. And then even last year when I was doing the live shows with Josh following NBA Lock, is that we don't necessarily know the best practice for Jock Market. It's kind of fun to explore that and figure it out as we go.
So, of course, as people pop in here, we remind you of two things. First and foremost, you should be subscribed to what we're doing. Hit that subscribe button, the thumbs up button as well. And also, as you see at the top of the screen above Greg, we have an awesome promo here for you with Jock Market where you use our code, Awesemo, AWESEMO, for 100% match up to $50. And as we see, we'll talk about Thursday night and beyond, you can do some damage with that match of up to $50. So take full advantage of it. I'm just curious to follow up on that. What have you seen or learned maybe from your exploration of different avenues on how to use Jock Market? And I say expert because I've worked with you long enough to know that you have a pretty steep learning curve and you pick things up pretty quickly. So how does your brain now work after maneuvering through a couple of these NFL Jock Market shows?
Yeah, well, I think this one is a little different than some of the other Thursday night games we've had, mostly because I don't know how competitive it's going to be. We've got the Carolina Panthers now, fairly significant favorites, and especially now, you know, Tyrod Taylor shouldn't matter this much to a spread or how we look at an outcome of a game, but he has a backup here in Davis Mills that we don't really know that much about, but it's fair to assume that he's not going to be a great NFL quarterback by any stretch of the imagination. And Tyrod played fairly well to start the season. So I think that's something that we're really going to have to look at, particularly after this game starts. And in terms of, buying low on players, maybe selling high, is what is the game script going to look like at halftime or maybe in the second or third quarter? Because is this going to set up as a situation where it's like, oh, look, the Panthers are up, 21-0 at halftime. This is going to set up the second half where they're not going to want to throw the ball a lot. How does that mean we approach the passing games and the run situations from both these teams? But are you kind of in the same boat as me where you assume this game isn't going to be super competitive?
Absolutely. And what I keep coming back to, and I think we'll use this in the backdrop as we look at value and maybe even in-game value for Houston, Greg, is a rookie quarterback who was never supposed to start this game on a short week against the Carolina Panthers defense that has been opportunistic and aggressive. I just don't know how Houston score outside of Brandon Cooks breaking one because somebody on Carolina falls down. I just don't know how Houston scores, maybe a field goal or two, but that's what I'm really struggling with, to your point, which is non-competitive. And how does Houston put any points up on the board?
Yeah, they probably don't. And it's also, there are no defenses to play at Jock Market. Right. So we don't have to worry about that at all. But yeah, I mean, my gut feeling for the game script here is if you want to be on the Panthers passing game from a value perspective, everything, there aren't players at this time of day that we could just say for sure, who's a good value player X. We just don't know that because we don't know what the IPO price are going to be bid up at. But let's say that some of these Carolina receivers end up being good values. I think there's a good chance that if one of these guys catches a touchdown early, you just want to sell them. Because I think we're going to see the Panthers open up, and obviously don't know this for sure, but this is what I think the most likely game script is I think the Panthers open up with a balanced attack, throwing the ball with Sam Darnold, and as long as they get up to that early lead, I think it's going to be a lot of Christian McCaffrey grinding the ball out in the second half. So I think that there's a couple of ways to look at that. Number one, we could look at the Panthers receivers, but I would look to get off them early if they start well. And another thing to consider for the second half is it's kind of hard to find value on Christian McCaffrey. He's going to be popular anyway, but maybe somebody like Chuba Hubbard, who's the backup running back for the Panthers. They also used some draft capital on him. Maybe it's a situation where they look at him in the second half and maybe he has almost no statistics in the first half and people are trying to sell shares of Hubbard for really cheap. Maybe that could be a time to buy on him. So I think more so than anything, we really have to pay attention to the game script and games that are looking really one-sided.
I love it because we've talked a lot about this when you and I have done DFS shows on the NBA and trying to get ahead of runs that are just inevitable in that sport. And one thing that always pops up is the blowout factor and how you prepare for the blowout factor. The beauty here is that you don't need to prepare as much as just in the game script as you laid out, know when to get ahead of it. So I think it's a perfect explanation of Hubbard, for example, somebody behind McCaffrey that is going to take, and look, even if Darnold isn't the one who is generating a lot, right, in the first half, and you mentioned a couple of big plays to the wide receivers, if you're predicting, and I think we all are on a similar lane here, that this is going to be a one-sided game, I would imagine that your point on McCaffrey and also selling those wide receivers at the half would stand for Darnold if he's the one that's helping to fuel the look. If McCaffrey's on the ground for 3 touchdowns, you may not get as much value with Darnold. But to your point about Moore or Robbie Anderson having a big half, I would think that you would then take that similar approach with Darnold.
Yeah, potentially. One thing with Darnold also is he's fairly likely. I think there's tiers in this game in terms of players who are most likely to be top scorers. And Christian McCaffrey is number one by a very wide margin. That's that's something we're really looking at on Jock Market is who do we expect or project to be the top scoring player in the game. And right now we have the fair IPO price for Christian McCaffrey, $21.21. To my knowledge, that's the highest I could ever remember a single player being. And, we haven't done as many single games for Jock Market. It's been a lot more full slates dating back to last year. So it's not like I'm working with a ton of one-game slate sample sizes. But even with that said, I can't remember anything where Christian McCaffrey has been, or any individual player has been as likely to be the top scoring player as Christian McCaffrey is in this game, which is why we have him projected with a $21.21 fair IPO price. And for reference, in our projections for Jock Market scoring, we have Christian McCaffrey projected for 26.66 fantasy points. Then Sam Darnold projected for 19.51, which 19.51 is very similar to the projection stuff on Jock Market, which I think a lot of people are basing their IPO bids off of. But Christian McCaffrey, who over on Jock Market is projected for 24.4 fantasy points, which is still a lot more than Darnold. We have him going even, well higher than that at 26.66. So I'm not going to be afraid to bid pretty high on McCaffrey here. He seems pretty likely to be a top scorer.
Do you have, and again, this is specific to this scenario here with McCaffrey, so it's not a general question by any means, but based on our predictions with, you just laid out the 26.66, the fair price IPO that Jock Market has, are you looking at a number that may be too much that you get to that's that point where you're like, you know what, it's not worth the spend for McCaffrey? Or is this a scenario in the one game showdown that we have here where they're really, great point, Greg, nobody in their right mind would think, outside of trying to be contrarian, that McCaffrey wouldn't at least have an inside track at being the top scorer here. So I wonder if that mitigates any damage to cost for somebody like this that people are going to pay up for.
So is your question just what's the most I'd be willing to spend for him?
That's it.
Well, I'll say this. So like I said, we have the fair IPO price projected from at $21.21. So in general, that's about as high as I would be willing to go. But also keep in mind that per share, first place pays out $25. You're starting to get to a point where if you're willing to bid, $23, $24 for Christian McCaffrey, there's a very slim margin of error there. Like he has to be the top scorer at that point, or else you're just not going to return value. So, I mean, I certainly wouldn't go above the 21.21, but even somewhere around, say, $20 or so, that's probably the most that I'd be willing to get to, mostly because first place per share pays out $25. Second place per share pays out $20. And you just get to a situation where do you really want to lock yourself into it's first or bust for Christian McCaffrey? Because then you get to a situation where, hey, maybe Robbie Anderson catches a 75-yard touchdown pass. Right. And it's like, all right, well, now my Christian McCaffrey shares are busted just because he paid so much for him. So I'm just kind of thinking through it as I talk. I probably wouldn't go above the $20 just because that's what pays out for the second top score.
And I'm curious because you referenced him with Darnold, kind of that similar approach where you're going to pull back if that number gets too high.
Yeah, so Sam Darnold, who we have projected for right now, the fair IPO rate is $16.87. But once again, referencing the payout structure over on Jock Market, first place, $25 is in per share for the top scoring fantasy player, 20 for second, 16 for third. I wouldn't go above the $16 mark for Sam Darnold for the same reasons that I said with Christian McCaffrey. You don't want to go too high because with Sam Darnold, there's a couple things that happens here. If he's going to be one of the top scorers on the slate, which I think is pretty likely, it's very reasonable. He's projected to be the second top scorer. The problem is if he does go out and throws for 250 yards and 3 touchdowns, there's a pretty good chance one of his receivers outscores him in that kind of situation. And then you're in a spot where maybe it's like McCaffrey is the top scoring player, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson is second, and then you've got Sam Darnold third. And if you bid over $16 for Sam Darnold at that point, then you're returning a loss on that just because that's what third place pays out per share, $16. So I wouldn't go above the $16 mark on Sam Darnold, even though we haven't projected for $16.87 as the fair IPO price. But anywhere around that, $15 mark where you could return value as long as Sam Darnold is one of the top 3 scoring players on the slate, I think that's reasonable because there's 3 players that we do have projected here to be fairly well above the rest of the field. That being Christian McCaffrey 1, Sam Darnold 2, then DJ Moore 3rd, who we have a projection of 16.33 fantasy points, and then nobody else is above 15.
Right. So just on the heels of that point about DJ Moore, and then we have below him clearly with Robbie Anderson, I wonder if there just isn't enough time. Look, the likelihood of this being a 7-7 game going into the third quarter is very low. So I wonder if the opportunity to strike for Moore and Anderson is so predicated on taking advantage of a bad team in the first half to where a very likely scenario could be DJ Moore does not score, yet they're up by 3 touchdowns or 24 points starting the second half, and then goes back to selling wide receivers on Carolina at the beginning. But I guess my question / concern would be with being aggressive in the IPO stage with either Moore or Anderson, you don't have that long of a window, right, for these guys to be successful with the assumption that this game's going to be over at the half. Even McCaffrey is going to be involved in the game plan when they're up, running the ball out, throwing the ball out quickly. Darnold's not going to be replaced in the third quarter, but Moore and Anderson may not be targeted nearly as much if they're up comfortably.
Yeah, and I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. I don't think 7-7 is out of the realm of possibility. If the Panthers, because it's not like Sam Darnold, there's a reason the Jets let go of Sam Darnold for almost nothing. And I still believe in Sam Darnold's future, but it's not like he's a highly accomplished young quarterback. I'm still not totally sold that he's going to be the guy for the Panthers. I like the gamble that they took by bringing him on as quarterback for low cost, but I'm still not sold that he's going to be the guy for them in the future. So I don't know that they're going to for sure put up points on the board. What I would be surprised by if it's a close game that's like 17-17 at halftime, if Sam Darnold is just playing, mediocrely and it's a fairly low scoring game on both sides, that wouldn't surprise me. If it's a shootout where both teams are putting up points, but Davis Mills a quarterback for Houston, that would be a shock to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how we approach some. We'll talk with Houston because I know Brandon Cooks is just a super popular name across the board from betting to DFS, and especially here when we talk about in relations to Jock Market. But Davis Mills, I mean, I don't want anything to do with my own money with Davis Mills tonight on any platform, from a prop to Jock Market or anything in between. Do you have any inside lane that you may be riding here with Davis Mills, or are you going to probably stay as far away as possible from him?
Once again, there's a break-even point for everything, and it depends what the IPO price is bid at. Is he my favorite player in this slate? No, and for most single game slates, the quarterbacks are the safest options we could get to. But once again, we have a fair IPO price of $9.86 for him, the lowest that I could remember seeing from a quarterback on a primetime slate this year, and most likely the lowest number that we're going to see the entire season. But still, if people are looking at Davis Mills and riding with that narrative, like you said, they're just like, I want nothing to do with this guy. Davis Mills, he was the backup to Tyrod Taylor coming into the year. I don't think he's any good. So if people are just totally unwilling to bid money on Davis Mills in the IPO period, yeah, I'd be willing to pay for him if people are only going like $5-6. I'd have no issue coming over the top of that. Now, am I bidding money on Davis Mills in the IPO period as if he's a competent starting quarterback? No, but I'm fine with paying for him to the point where if you look at the guys that he's priced in between, It's Mark Ingram is below him in our fair IPO projections, and then we got Brandon Cooks above him. He's still a quarterback in on a 1-game slate. So it's not crazy to think like, well, I think Davis Mills scores more fantasy points on average than Mark Ingram.
Yeah, that's a fair take. Absolutely. And I would agree with that. I wonder where the jump is to get ahead of Davis Mills' value. It may not be as easy as the second half. I mean, if this guy is stinking it up out there in the first half and they're down 17-3, yeah, we expect him to throw the ball more, but I don't know why that would automatically make him a more competent quarterback if he was struggling in the first half. So just volume alone may not be enough for you or others to jump in and buy really low Davis Mills, especially if he's struggling. Now, that 7-7 scenario where Mills is not losing a game for you, then I think his in-game value would be exponentially higher.
I'd rather, I mean, unless there's talk of him potentially getting pulled from the game, I'd be more apt to buy shares of him when it's like a 27-3 game than if it's 7-7, because, in the 27-3 game, what's happening? The Panthers are playing prevent defense and be like, hey, throw 10, 15-yard pass against us all day in the second half. We don't really care because we're just not going to give up big chunk plays. So I think that Davis Mills would have an easier time finding success down 27-3 than if the game's 7-7, where the Panthers are still trying to put pressure on him and they're still, being fairly aggressive on defense. In a spot where all of a sudden they're laying back a little bit, then I think that actually that's the one situation where we really could see Davis Mills find some fantasy success.
Make sure you hit that thumbs up button as you pop in here. You should already be here with that notification bell. And then in between, make sure you're subscribed to what's going on here. Take full advantage of our promo here that we're doing with Jock Market. My goodness, Awesemo, AWESEMO, and it's a 100% match for a deposit up to $50. You put in 50, we'll match that $50. We should talk about Brandon Cooks as well, because I know he's been such a popular name, and probably I would think he and maybe David Johnson would be the two guys who would be the most not pure, but the most bulletproof to a game plan. Like, if it's a tight game, Brandon Cooks is probably a big reason why. If they're down, they're definitely going to start peppering him even more so. How are you approaching Brandon Cooks, both with the IPO and also in game?
I think that Brandon Cooks takes a pretty big hit from Davis Mills being a quarterback. Mostly because Tyrod Taylor, he was playing well at the start of the season, and also Brandon Cooks, just given that he's such a linear receiver in terms of running up and down the field and is generally relying on big plays. It's not like there's a lot of times where we see Brandon Cooks having a big fantasy football game where it's PPR based. It's like, hey, look, Brandon Cooks had 10 receptions for 70 yards, kind of like what we see from Cole Beasley sometime. But like, Brandon Cooks is very reliant on a big play. And I just don't know that Davis Mills is going to be the guy who's going to be making those passes downfield to make Brandon Cooks viable. So to me, with Brandon Cooks, I'm not sure what his actual realistic upside is here with such an inexperienced quarterback that we don't know if is any good or not as of right now. But I think it's reasonable to expect that Davis Mills is not good based on how the season has started to this point. I think that if he was really impressive in training camp, they would have just opened the season with him as the quarterback. But yeah, I think that there could definitely be struggles with Davis Mills getting the ball downfield to Brandon Cooks. So of the pay-up options, we'll call them pay-up options. Here are the players that have an IPO projection over $10 for us right now. Christian McCaffrey, Sam Darnold, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, Brandon Cooks. And Brandon Cooks and Robbie Anderson are both fairly close to each other, slightly behind DJ Moore. There's a little bit of a gap there. Of that group of guys, I have the least amount of confidence in Cooks, just because I don't know that he's going to be able to get the passes that he would normally get, even if Tyrod Taylor was the quarterback.
Do you feel the same way? Because I think there's a little more gray area, or maybe the gap isn't as wide between DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson, despite our own projections for what we have with Jock Market and the numbers that reflect on site. It seems like, though, as much as we're dependent on big plays from both guys, you're not going to get the volume with Robbie Anderson, but you might get that big play or two that could just make up for whatever else you're not getting.
Yeah, I definitely prefer DJ Moore to Robbie Anderson. We have a pretty big gap in the projections here. 16.33 for Moore, 13.31 fantasy points expect for Robbie Anderson. The fair IPO price, $13.81 for Moore, $10.77 for Robbie Anderson. So all things considered equal, I'd rather get to DJ Moore. But, once again, if the IPO bidding is like, well, DJ Moore's at $14 and Robbie Anderson's at $8, then yeah, I'd rather have Robbie Anderson at that price. But if we just assume the prices are the same for these guys, then give me DJ Moore all day.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the game flow script that we've laid out here and dealing with Davis Mills as just being such a brand new unknown and most likely shade to the fact that he's not going to be good tonight. Can we take advantage of anybody in the short passing game, like a David Johnson, or in that regards, even to a lesser extent, a Lindsey here, because it's much easier for them to get the ball out, at least from a volume standpoint, 4 yards, even if it's lateral, as opposed to trying to develop something for Brandon Cooks, which you accurately, in my opinion, said is going to be insanely difficult for Davis Mills and this offense to do.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I know that maybe people might want to go to Anthony Miller in that kind of situation, but the issue is that Anthony Miller's projected fairly highly over on Jock Market right now. They have him projected as the 9th overall top scorer in the game. We have him with a fair IPO price of $4.39. And based on the projections that are up on Jock Market right now, I kind of assume that people are already going to be bidding a little higher on Anthony Miller than I would be willing to pay. I don't know that's the case, but I'm just speculating that's going to be the case. So I think he'd be the guy that benefits most. However, the projection's already there for him. In terms of the other guys, David Johnson, Phillip Lindsay, I think I'd be a little more apt to take a shot on Phillip Lindsay just because right now he is projected 15th in the Jock Market prices. They only have him projected for 4.2 fantasy points. That's around where we have him. But, Phillip Lindsay is still somebody who I think has potential to make some big plays happen. And also, just given his age, I think there's probably a preference in a blowout type situation to have Phillip Lindsay on the field than David Johnson or Mark Ingram. So once again, it's going to depend on game script, but maybe not somebody I want to place a heavy IPO bid on or anything like that. But after the game starts, maybe even the score is a blowout and Phillip Lindsay hasn't done anything. I think buying really low on him, taking some shots, Phillip Lindsay would be the guy in kind of that possession type PPR role that I would think has the most upside for Houston.
Any interest in my buddy here from South Jersey, Colin Thompson?
Let's see.
He's the third straight tight end.
I was looking. I was just kind kind of curious what his.
He's last on our list. By the way,
let's see if it's the same for. By the way, he's
a great dude, and he's local here to Philly, so I love him. Temple's finest.
Yeah, I don't even know if he's.
We have him projected.
He's not even in the Jock Market pricing though. But hey, the short answer is no. The long answer is still no.
No, exactly. Yeah. Maybe you take an extra couple of seconds there. No, I knew I was setting you up by all means with that one. Is there anybody else? I'm always interested to see, and it's not going to be at the depths of value with Colin Thompson by any means, but have we maybe left anybody that could interest you? And again, some of this, if not a lot of this, is trying to predict what happens after a quarter or maybe two and jumping ahead of it. So if it's Houston just being down, if it's scenarios that we've kind of talked about, is there anybody else? I mean, you referenced Chuba Hubbard right at the start there as far as somebody else who may be able to come in and take advantage of a blowout scenario, especially on the ground. I don't know if there's another person that you've targeted either at the IPO or just maybe earmarked and thought to yourself, let me see how this game flow goes, and I could take advantage of a bench player or somebody who's splitting time at a position.
I don't know.
And it doesn't have to be, especially in this type of game.
I'm actually going to go back to, I'll say Chris Conley, I guess, who's projected for 15.64 fantasy points over on Jock Market. We have him for 6.72. So we have him a little bit higher. Fair IPO price at $3.97. Maybe he's somebody that people just don't bid on in the IPO period, and this potential possession receiver for Houston who, maybe he catches 5 or 6 passes in a fairly low scoring game. That makes him, the 5th or 6th overall scoring fantasy player. So kind of combining two of the questions you asked me in a row there, in terms of the possession receiver, I think maybe Chris Conley would fit that mold, but it's an ugly fantasy game for sure.
It's not easy. Right. And then you would really need, do you work the pre and then post flop angle with Conley? Can you get in on a guy like Conley who nobody's bidding on? He has a decent first half and shoots up, and then you sell high for somebody that you basically paid nothing for?
Depends on the game script. I think it's probably more likely that Conley finds success against a prevent defense and a blowout in the second half than that he would just be really good in the first half. So it would be a situation where either I'd be looking to buy low on him if the Panthers are blowing up the Texans and Chris Conley is maybe on the field for a lot of snaps, but hasn't led to production. Maybe that's a situation where the game script looks favorable for him and he's getting the reps on the field where we could expect him to continue to play a lot in the second half. Or if just the IPO bidding, if he's going for, like $2, $2.50, that's the number I'd be willing to go over the top in the IPO period where we have him projected for $3.97 as the fair IPO price.
I tell you, it's a great name because I think so many people are focused on Brandon Cooks and then the running backs that Lindsay, especially, right, that you can throw to a possession receiver, especially if this game is not a blowout or it is a blowout, somebody who's going to be out there on the field. There you have it right there. See, that's why I ask Greg at the end all the time, in case we've missed or didn't hit somebody up there, so that you're thinking to yourself, well, okay, I'm fully prepared. No, now you are fully prepared for the Thursday night showdown on Jock Market. Use our promo code if you haven't already, Awesemo, AWESEMO, and we'll match your first deposit up to $50. Once again, my friend, knocked it out of the park. I think myself and everybody else out there is amped up and ready to win some money tonight.
Yeah, definitely. Good luck tonight, everybody.
All right. For Greg Ehrenberg, Tyler producing, you out there, we appreciate you joining us. Hit that thumbs up button on your way out. Make sure you are subscribed to the Awesemo DFS channel, our odds channel, our fantasy football channel. We have tons of content, all leading up, mind you, to Thursday night football. So don't go anywhere. We're jammed for the rest of the day here on channel. Have a great day, great night, and good luck.